Hi everyone, in this tutorial we'll walk through the process of creating a versatile status bar and setting up some basic controls to make it flexible. If you find this helpful along the way, feel free to leave a like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Let's begin by creating a new composition. Once that's ready, we will add a new solid, making sure it matches the composition size and setting its color to gray. From there, we will head into Effects, and under HUD and UI Elements Shapes, we will create a new rectangle. Under Rectangle Parameters, we will adjust the width to 0.02, the length to 0.1, and disable the option to center it along the y-axis. Then, under Appearance Parameters, we will set the outer thickness to 0.0005. Next, we will go to Effects, under HUD and UI Elements Matrices, and create a matrix of rectangles. In the Appearance Parameters, we will switch the style to Solid, and under Node Parameters, we will set the width to 0.018 and the length to 0.001, again making sure it's not centered along the y-axis. Then, we will set the number of elements on the x-axis to 1 and on the y-axis to 40. Then adjust the spacing y to 0.0025 and keep the centering along y disabled. With the visual structure in place, we can move on to setting up the controllers. We will start by adding a float controller, then duplicating it 4 times. Then, create an integer x and y control structure. Once everything is added, we will position the structure control around the center. To make expressions easier to read, we will rename the controllers using short labels. We will use Y for width, LE for length, SU for subdivision, SP for spacing, and EV for evolution speed. Next, we move everything to the top. Now we can start linking everything together. We will begin by holding Alt and clicking on the stopwatch next to the width parameter to add an expression. Using the peak width, we will connect it directly to the width controller. Then, we will repeat the same process with the length. This time linking it directly to the length controller. Now let's define some default values. We will set the width to 0.02 and the length to 0.1. For the subdivision, we will use 1 on X and 40 on Y. Then we'll set the spacing to 0.0015 and evolution speed to 1. With that in place, we can move over to the matrix. We will start by adding an expression to the width, linking it to the width controller, and then subtracting the spacing multiplied by 2. From there, we will link the number of elements on the y-axis to the Y subdivision controller. Next, we will add an expression to the spacing along Y. Inside parentheses, we will link the length controller, subtract the spacing, and then divide the result by the number of subdivisions. Then, under Global Transforms, we will link the Y position to the spacing controller. Now, we will temporarily set the Y subdivisions to 10, then, under node parameters, add an expression to the length. Inside parentheses, link the expression to the length controller. Subtract the spacing, and divide everything by the number of subdivisions along Y. And then subtract the spacing once more. Once everything is connected, we will take a moment to confirm that everything is working as expected. After that, we can bring the subdivision back up to 40 and move on to adding a bit of animation. Here, we will update the expression controlling the number of elements on Y. We will introduce a temporary variable to store the current value. Then, create a second variable that adds a wiggle effect to the first variable. We will link the wiggle frequency to the evolution speed controller, and the amplitude to the first variable. Then, we will add an if statement to ensure that the animation does not exceed the original range. Now we set the number of elements Y to 0 to prevent the wiggle from taking it into account. It looks like there is an error in the expression, so let's correct it by setting a proper variable name. Now we can duplicate the element and experiment with different subdivision values to create variations. And just like that, we've built a versatile vertical status bar with full adjustable width, length, spacing, and subdivision, all driven by simple controllers.